Morning, everyone. I'm Matt McCullough. I'm National Sales Manager at Aldermore. Hope you're having a good morning so far. Has it been interesting? I'd say that's good. Hopefully I'm not going to bore you for 25 minutes. Just as a quick heads up, I apologise if I start coughing. I've had quite a bad cough the past couple of weeks, so it might put me off a little bit this morning, so apologies. I'm here today to give you a bit more of an informal look at the world of company buy-to-let. Hopefully you're going to learn a couple of tips to think about when you're faced with some things. I'm going to tell you a bit around what today's world looks like, because I know there's been a lot of changes. Not just, we know what's happened 5 years back, but I'm talking in today's world now. There's changes every day to the buy-to-let landscape. Different ways people can look to lend, look to move out of lending, look to deviate portfolios. I'll also touch on some of the more common points around the pros and cons of company buy-to-let. Why are people doing this? What to look out for? How I can potentially, hopefully help you maybe signpost your clients in a way that helps them when coming to that new application. And also think about the vital points of the process that I think sometimes get missed and could help you actually land more business. I'll also just give you a quick brief tour, just for your own information, about how easy it is to set up a limited company, just so you know what happens before normally these clients come to yourself. And finally, new this year, I'll spend the last couple of minutes telling you how Aldermore can help. All right? So where I'll start is today's world. Now, what I will ask first of all, can I have a show of hands of how many people have had a limited company buy-to-let inquiry this year alone? Okay, pretty much everybody. Yeah, everybody. Now, can I also ask you to raise your hands if that's an increase on last year? Okay, the majority of the room. And that tells its same story in the data that we've got. So you can see on here that, again, the left-hand side of the screen is just an infographic to tell you know why company buy-to-let is so big, because people are losing money in individual names, and when money gets lost, solutions need to be found. I'm right in saying that. That's what everyone looks for. So here's what the solutions have done. It's driven demand, as I've already proven right there between us, that you've seen more inquiries over the past 2 years, as lenders have, and that's because so many more people are going down this route. In fact, 47,000 new SPVs purely for buy-to-let were set up in 2020. Okay? Now that has decreased slightly from 2021 to 2022 by about 13% year on year, but what matters is it's still continuing to grow overall. Now, that's taken it to a total of 269,300 SPVs, limited companies in this country purely for buy-to-let, which is staggering. Now, the stat that is really interesting for me is 29% of active buy-to-let mortgages are right now within limited company structures. Now, that's an increase of 3%. Doesn't sound a lot, but it's still an incremental increase, because you've got to bear in mind that not everyone can do this at the right time, which we'll explain about shortly. But the reason people are doing this, as I've said, is the time is right for these buyers. Now, the thing that really caught me out when doing some research to put this slide deck together is that currently 1 in 2 of all new buy-to-let mortgages placed in 2021 were within and taken out by a landlord's limited company. Now, I find that staggering, because everyone has got this bias that it's the big landlords that are going to company buy-to-let. In actual fact, that's proven us that the smaller landlords and even the newer landlords are going straight into that if they've got a plan to grow. What this data doesn't tell you, though, and this is the bit where we have to think a little bit more carefully, is that I got asked a question outside this morning around how I feel about the buy-to-let market's going. Is it increasing? Is it stagnating? Is it declining? For me, I actually think it's on a bit of a plateau personally, and that stat doesn't tell the true story, because that 1 in 2 doesn't tell you how many of them are already owned by the people that own the company, incorporating basically. All that's doing is moving property around rather than people acquiring new property and growing bigger portfolios. So that's just something to be mindful of when I share a bit of data like that. I think that can catch us out. But the big thing is, a total of 583,000 mortgaged properties in the UK are held in companies. Now that's staggering. And the reason people are doing that, as I've already discussed, is the tax relief on individual landlords doesn't exist anymore. So people are moving into the company space to literally put profit back in their pocket, but also do some more creative things that I'll talk about in a moment. But first, what I'll cover is How are these people setting up these companies to start doing buy-to-let lending? And it's relatively simple. Most of the time, though, I'm right in saying that you won't be involved in this level of detail at this point, I should imagine, because most people would have sought proper tax advice before they start doing this and have this done for them. But the first thing people will do is, I want to set up a limited company, an SPV. How are they doing this? It's relatively simple. The first thing they will do is actually choose a company name. That might be the exciting bit, right? If it's an entrepreneurial business name, it's a buzzword they like. It might even be a name of their, one of their surnames in the family, whatever that may be. They'll do a quick due diligence to make sure it's not already taken, and then what they'll do is move on to register the company at Companies House. Now, this is the most vital part of the process where I feel a lot of time is wasted, lost, and a lot of mistakes get made. At Aldermore alone, we see a lot of SPVs set up in the incorrect way that stop people borrowing. For example, some people do want to put their children within the SPV structures for inheritance planning, things like that. However, doing so and adding them as directors when they're underage is not only illegal, but it stops lenders lending. That's something that we see quite often. Also, shareholding. We need to understand at this point what percentage of shareholding people should want to have and actually are thinking about in the future if they want to whittle away and increase, if they have got minors in there, children, grandchildren and so on, into that company to take on that empire in the future. And lastly, the number of directors in there, because some people believe that you can have just 1 or 2 directors. Some lenders can allow up to 6. Now, the reason why I'm saying this now is because this is a conversation I feel should be happening from your customer's tax advisor and you. Because what happens, unfortunately, is if someone makes a dog's dinner of this, you're the ones having to pick up the pieces and find the obscure lenders that might do the case if the company's set up in not the quite relevant and transparent structure. So having that conversation with the landlord's accountant at that point is vital to make your life easier. The third point, which is very, very, very simple, but also very important for a lot of the mainstream company borrowers in today's world, is having the respective relevant SIT codes in that company set up. Again, I won't bore you with the detail there, but these need to make sure they are relevant and correct because a lot of lenders ask for specific SIT code relevant SPVs. And this is equally, if not one of probably the most important parts of the entire process, is the Articles of Association. These things can be 40 pages long in detail. This is basically the terms and conditions to which that company can trade, how it works, who has shareholding, who controls things, and so on and so forth. But the key thing is, if you are looking at a current existing SPV in today, or even a trading company, more importantly, make sure you have some of a quick scan at that. I've seen things go wrong where people place a case in the company world, don't check this, and that terms and condition document actually forbids them from holding property. Therefore, the case gets to offer, because lenders don't really check that until the legal stage, and it all falls down. So check the Articles of Association to make sure someone can actually borrow in that current company structure. And the easy bit, set up a business bank account. That's the last thing people will do, because most lenders will ask that the mortgage is paid out of the business bank account that the mortgage is attributed to. So that's how easy it is to set it up. A couple of things that you need to make sure of that you're checking when you're getting SPV inquiries. The shareholding's right, the story's right, and the Articles of Association make sense to have them and also allow them to borrow for property purposes in that company. Now, I want to talk about some pros and cons. Because, well, why are people even doing this, right? Well, we know that the first pro to all of this is to allow people to offset 100% of their mortgage interest as a company borrower. You can still do that. You can continue to do this for the foreseeable. I can't tell you that the government are never going to stop it, because I'm sure one day they'll change their minds on it. But for now, borrowers can still offset 100% of the mortgage interest. Holiday lets can do the same. They don't have to be a company or individual. They can still do this, but for the purpose of this today, I'm going to focus purely on limited company buy-to-let. Now, people think that's probably the only reason people borrow into it. Is that the main thing that people say to you when a landlord goes, "I'll move into company buy-to-let"? The accountants, because the profit I can offset, I can earn more money. Is that kind of what you hear normally? Okay, so here's an interesting one for you. That what really good tax advisors will look at is to try and diversify, okay, how many shareholders can I put into this new company? So for example, if it's a property empire in Mr. and Mrs., for example, but actually it can now be Mr., Mrs., 2 kids and potentially a grandchild, you may have the opportunity to allow them 5 different shareholders to receive £2,000 tax-free dividend relief every year, which means that the profit that's in the company, not only are you then offsetting 100% of the mortgage interest, you're winding that taxable allowance even further because you've now got 5 shareholders receiving that profit rather than 2 individuals that can't use that tax relief. So this is another really strong way why people are using inheritance planning, offsetting mortgage planning, but also to get further tax relief. The third pro to it really is that profits are easily reinvested in a company buy-to-let scheme, because the reality is that if you've got multiple SPVs, for example, which people will have and you will see, you can move equity around without having to take and pay a higher rate of income tax by taking that profit out of the business. You know, sole traders taking that out, it's hitting them quite hard. Limited company corporate borrower is paying corporation tax to potentially move that money out into a new structure, even if they need to. They don't always need to do that. So it's far more profitable and efficient to reinvest profits in that business. And this is the one where I'll call it, it's a pro to it because you get legal separation, and it's a pro for different reasons. If you're going to de-risk from an overall financial point of view, you know, you can split your portfolio in different ways. You know, technically the property in the company name is owned by the company. What I would say is, while that's a nice to have, we've still got to remember that the people within that company are actually going to be signing for the debt. And that is part of the con that I'm going to look at today, which is coming in a moment. The last one I'm going to focus on first is limited company running costs. I will come back to capital gains in a moment. But limited company running cost is the one thing that needs to be carefully thought about as part of all of this. Because you could have a client that absolutely saves themselves £25,000 a year in profit and actually can reinvest any profit they're getting to grow that portfolio efficiently, whilst also giving themselves extra dividend relief. But what we need to remember is every new mortgage still needs director to sign personal guarantees for them to get independent legal advice. For new purchases, outside of a couple of schemes, which I might talk about in a moment, they'll pay stamp duty. So it's not cheap. And the running costs, just to keep that going, outside of incorporating there in the first place, can be quite high. Keeping the accounts maintained, looking at the books. If you've got a larger portfolio, you might actually want to go more professional and get something like a letting agency or a maintenance firm. All of that comes into this. And on top of all of that, you still lose your capital gains tax allowance. You don't have that. But I must admit, for what you're gaining profit-wise and longevity, for the right people, it's a really right move. Now, there are 3 vital considerations that I think, and from being out in the field all over the country for years seeing this happen, I think get forgot about quite a lot. Because when someone comes to you for a mortgage on a buy-to-let, you source, you do fact find, you do suitability, you make sure it's right for the customer and the circumstances. But actually, what can I do to make sure that I can get the longevity for them and me at the same time for their business? The first thing I want to look at is making sure that I'm utilising the current portfolio to capital raise to pay off any of them, dare I say it, debts and costs and upcoming fees that are coming as part of that journey. Rather than me just facilitating that mortgage in the way that is compliant, that meets their needs, it's right with their tax advice, how can I make mine and their life easier next time by either making sure I've got enough room now in the portfolio to capital raise to ensure that I can pay them moving forward. And it's at this point I want to be really careful around just making sure, as a tip, that you always stress a portfolio borrower's portfolio. There are lenders out there today who do some fantastic stuff that don't stress the portfolio, which is great if you've got one that's quite tight and the security works well. But the one thing that will hinder you on is, do you know your options at any point if you need to raise money, move a mortgage, borrow more in the open market at a lender that does stress the portfolio, okay? Now hold that thought for 1 second, because what you also need to think about is, are the lenders that you are looking at for limited company borrowing in the product transfer market? The reason I say that, it isn't to make your life easier, right, is to stop the fail-safe of the first point happening. If you have used a lender that hasn't stressed the portfolio, how do you know that you can get that customer off the higher SVR in 2, 3, 5 years if they don't have a product switch option? Because again, it goes back down to, even if you don't need to stress the portfolio, make sure you do. It's the best habit you'll ever get into. It can be a little bit time consuming. If you've got a lender like Aldermore, our BDMs will do it for you, but make sure it's done, because at least you know that if you have to go down the option of moving, you've already thought ahead. 2 birds with 1 stone, you can try and pitch a capital raise to cover some of them costs. So always make sure capital raise is available and product switch is always front of mind, okay? And the last point, it sounds simple, right? Incorporation, because that's what you're doing here, right? These are people that are thinking about moving properties into a company. The one thing, what I'm trying to talk about here is 2 vital points that I think everyone, even lenders, don't do well at educating people on. Incorporating a buy-to-let is relatively simple, okay? But it's not always just about taking the 40% LTV debt on a property to a 40% LTV mortgage in a company name. And if that's what you're looking for, then you've got the opportunity here to combine 2 more of these points, which again is capital raising, because look for lenders that allow you to stretch to their maximum LTVs as part of the incorporation, not just pound for pound, meaning that whilst you're moving that customer across to a new corporate structure, you can then use the equity they've got to increase that balance to either fund more properties, to fund more costs, to save you time, and to save them having to put their hand in their own pocket, yeah? Let the lenders pay for that out of their capital with the equity that the customer has if the circumstances meet. But more importantly, the customers that you will start to see won't always want to go down the company route straight away. It'll be something that's timed to meet relative different reliefs, to meet relatively different timelines like ERC roll-offs and things like that. So always look for a lender that can allow you to incorporate as part of the current deals. And what I mean by this is, let's say, Mr. McCullough, I've got 4 properties, right, that I want to incorporate in 2 years' time. And I only want to do that because I've just taken out a new 5-year fixed 2 years ago. So I've got 3 years to run. I can't do it now. I've got 2 that are due to mature and 2 that are fixed. If I move them all in one now, I can qualify for some reliefs, but I'm going to pay all of that ERC fees that will just wipe out everything that I'm saving. However, there is a lender over here that will allow me to fix onto any of their rates, and as long as I come back to them during that fixed rate period to do the incorporation deal, they'll waive the fees. So think about the planning that you and the tax advisor have done to save all them deficiencies in the process. They all get eaten up if you're willing to pay ERCs straight on as part of that deal. Make sure that you invest a little bit more time speaking to BDMs, understanding if a lender can do that. Okay. So these, before I go on to sort of how Aldermore really helped there, the discussion points for me, this is the point where I feel get lost between what's happening from a tax advice point of view and then what you're getting from a new business inquiry point of view from your landlord and your customers. And again, these are just a couple of things to think about, look out for, maybe question with your company. But first things first is deposit money. Now, you're going to ask where that's coming from. I know you are. It's part of your job. It's part of due diligence. It's just a core basic of doing mortgage lending. But actually how that money is structured within the company is vital, right? Because actually, is that a gift from their personal equity into the company as an intercompany loan on the accounts? Yes, more than likely it will be most of the time. If it is, make sure the lenders that you're facing for these products can facilitate that type of deposit. Not all of them can, most can nowadays, so just bear that in mind. More importantly though, it might be coming from a different company they own. It could be from multiple SPVs and they're just moving money around, which is fine for a lot of lenders, but even less do allow that. So again, just make sure you're doing your research on the deposit to make sure it stacks up. The money and where it's come from and where it's sat might absolutely be fine for the lender's policy, but it might not be right to place the case first time. Make sure we're checking the age and the number of all the shareholders and directors. You don't want someone too young to have directorships. It's illegal. You can't do it. You can't facilitate it. You don't want someone too old, because whilst lenders have a longer cut-off date in buy-to-let, for example, Aldermore's 85, you find the lender that has a younger shareholder policy that allows the policy to go off the younger borrower. Therefore, you can get maximum terms for the older borrowers within the structure without needing to change too much. But make sure you think about that pre-application, not during. The third point is future plans. Have you got any children in there that need to go in now, and how are you going to be involved in staging that over the years? Because there'll be times when you need to revisit that portfolio to capital raise some more to give you more business, and actually that could be then for a good venture for you and the customer to take capital out of that, to gift to the younger individuals in there to help them buy their first homes or their first buy-to-let in their own name or company name, and it helps them diversify and helps you get more business. And the last one is incorporation and reliefs. Make sure that if nobody's talking to you about reliefs, you just ask that question first. Has your tax advisor talked to you about any reliefs at all? If the answer's yes, great, leave it at that. If it's no, just tell them to revisit, because a lot of people in today's world can get stamp duty and tax relief by moving multiple properties at one time, multiple property relief. I won't go into the great detail of that today, but what I will say is that if people can save thousands on stamp duty, they will, and if they've not invested their time in that, you just don't want someone coming back to you in the future, to question why that didn't happen. It's not your advice, but it's just something good to know. And actually, that might then get you more cases out of it, because if they need to move 6 at one time rather than the 2 they want, they might hold off for a bit and then come back for all 6. But this is the most important thing of today. If you are not already linked up with a tax advisor, just make sure that you do it by some way or means. Even if it's a conversation once a month down the pub or wherever you go to socialise, just to make sure that you're keeping abreast of all the new changes. And also, if you've got clients that aren't involved in tax advice, you can refer them in. I won't go into great detail about Aldermore, because I'm hopefully here to try and share some hints and tips about that. You can come and see us on the stand. But everything that I've told you about today, of the pitfalls to look out for, the things that could crop you up in terms of looking at lenders that might not help, we help with them all. Whether it's incorporation during the fixed rate period, whether it's looking to do 6 directors, whether it's looking to do a day 1 SPV, or even a trading limited company mortgage, Aldermore can help to all of that, and we do product switches. So we're not going to leave your customer stuck on a high SVR in 5 years' time because we've not stressed the portfolio at the front end. We will do that for you to make sure that you've always got a future plan. And that is my presentation.